Hi everyone, welcome to the third part of our lecture introducing XML. In this part of the lecture, we're going to focus on the third bullet point, where we'll be talking about XML as it compares to document type definitions, or DTDs. DTDs, also known as document type definitions, are really a nice set of markup declarations that we use to define some kind of document type for an HTML type language. So it could be HTML, XML, or HTML. They provide the legal building blocks and the structure for a document that includes the kinds of elements and attributes that can be included. So depending on the XML schema, for example, you might be using VRA or something else, and those all have specific document type definitions that your metadata and thus your XML adhere to. XML has rules, as we've talked about, that tell us what a well-formed XML is. And DTDs allow you to take those rules kind of to the next level by adding additional constraints. Some of those constraints can include things like having the having specific kinds of elements and attributes, as I mentioned, but essentially it's used as sort of a standard to allow you to ensure that your XML is following those rules so that you have the right kinds of elements, you have the right order of elements, and in some cases you have specific lists of values that you can use. So that's important for validating, because we take our XML and ensure that it matches those established rules within our DTD. In order to use a document type definition, you basically need to declare that you're using it just like you would with anything else. So the particular language for that is this line right here. So as you can see, we have, if we go back to our book example, we have doc type, and then we have book, which is our root element, right, in our bookstore example. And then for the system, you just have system, and then you have the actual file name right here. So that is the formatting that you would follow when you're implementing a DTD. There are some downsides to using a DTD. They're not super flexible. You can't have dependencies. So if you have certain things set up with your attributes, then you have to have the next value that goes with that, right? So for an ebook, for example, you need a URL for that, and so that can be difficult. DTDs also aren't always super compatible, so the formatting, as you can see over here on the right hand side, is very different from XML, and so that can be problematic, right? With XML, this was proposed as a solution to the problems associated with document type definitions. We know that XML has that flexibility. It's extensible, right? You can keep adding on to it. You're not limited in that way that you are with document type definitions. And in order to refer to using XML or an XSD, you would include this language here, and then you would have your own your XSD or XML schema definition linked in this line of code right here. The downsides to schemas, they're obviously a little bit more complicated to implement because they are more flexible, which makes sense, right? It also makes them harder to validate. So you have to have that file along with your XML file, and you also need special software to deal with that, which can be kind of annoying. Whereas DTDs can be validated in a browser, so it's a little bit more convenient, right? But the things you're able to do with that are much more flexible and expansive, and that's the value of using XML rather than DTDs. And just a fun little lingo thing for you, an XML document that has correct syntax is called well-formed, which I think I mentioned a few slides ago. If it's validated against a document type definition, it's considered both well-formed and valid. The other thing I want to point out here is that both document type definitions and XML schema definitions are used to make sure that the information that we have in our XML file is in the correct format, right? That it's adhering to those rules that we have established. But when we try to look at it in a browser, it's not pretty, right? So we have this tech equipment example, which you'll be working with in your assignment. And as you can see, we know what's going on here, right? We know that we're talking about technology equipment, and we have computer, and you can imagine we have a closing tag for computer down here somewhere, and then we have all these additional elements nested within that. But it's not visually appealing, right? And so that's what we're going to focus on in our last lecture, where we talk about how we can style our XML. All right, so that's it for this lecture, and move on to our last lecture, which is styling XML.